Picture yourself standing in the shadow of a ruined castle, wind cutting through broken stone. The year is 1307, and across Europe, dawn breaks on what history calls Black Friday. Knights in white mantles marked with red crosses are dragged from their beds, shackled, accused of heresy. Their crime: supposedly worshipping demons, denying Christ, practicing forbidden rituals in the darkness of their chapels. But what if everything you've been told about that day is wrong? What if the Knights Templar weren't heretics at all? What if they were simply 700 years too early? You see, for centuries, we've accepted the narrative that the Templars fell because they became corrupt, greedy, or worse. King Philip of France needed their gold. Pope Clement needed their silence. And so the order that had defended Christendom for 2 centuries was erased in a single coordinated strike. Case closed. History written. Mystery solved. Except mysteries have a way of refusing to stay buried. And the more you dig into what the Templars actually discovered during their time in Jerusalem, the more you realize that their destruction wasn't about corruption. It was about revelation. A truth so dangerous that it threatened the very foundation of medieval power. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey that spans 9 centuries. We'll walk through the ruins of Solomon's Temple, decode symbols carved in stone, and trace connections that powerful institutions have spent lifetimes trying to obscure. Because what the Templars found beneath Jerusalem wasn't just treasure, it was knowledge. Knowledge about the nature of reality itself that wouldn't be accepted by mainstream science until the 20th century. This isn't just another conspiracy theory. This is a story about visionaries who glimpsed the future and paid the ultimate price for seeing too clearly. Before we descend into those tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, let me give you just a taste of what we're dealing with. The Templars weren't just soldiers. They were the world's first international banking system. They invented the concept of credit. They built a network of communication that spanned continents. They developed architectural techniques that wouldn't be understood for centuries. And according to recently discovered documents, they were conducting experiments that sound remarkably similar to what we now call quantum physics. Sound impossible? Stay with me, because we're about to explore evidence that suggests the Knights Templar weren't primitive medieval warriors. They were researchers, scientists, explorers of consciousness, who stumbled upon truths that our civilization is only now beginning to rediscover. Let's begin where their story truly starts. Not with their founding in 1119, but with what they found once they arrived in the Holy Land. The 9 original knights, led by Hugh de Payens, claimed their mission was protecting pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. Noble work, certainly. But here's the first clue that something else was happening. 9 knights protecting thousands of pilgrims across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. The math doesn't work. You couldn't effectively patrol a city block with 9 men, let alone secure trade routes across the entire Kingdom of Jerusalem. So what were they really doing? The answer lies in where they set up headquarters, not in a fortress overlooking the roads, not in a strategic position to monitor pilgrim traffic. Instead, they established themselves in the ruins of Solomon's Temple, built directly on top of what Jews and Christians considered the holiest site on earth. And then they started digging. For 9 years, these knights excavated beneath the Temple Mount, not looking for gold, not searching for relics, but methodically, scientifically exploring what lay hidden in the bedrock beneath Jerusalem. They worked in secret, with no recorded purpose, no official sanction, no explanation for what they hoped to find. But find something they did, because when they emerged from those tunnels, everything changed. Within decades, the Templars transformed from 9 obscure knights into the most powerful organization in Europe. They became advisors to kings, builders of cathedrals, masters of technologies that seemed almost magical to their contemporaries. The question that haunts historians is simple. What did they discover down there? Traditional scholarship offers unsatisfying answers. Perhaps they found treasure from the original temple. Maybe they uncovered religious artifacts. Possibly they stumbled upon ancient scrolls. All plausible, all reasonable, and all missing the larger picture. Because when you examine what the Templars accomplished after their return from Jerusalem, you're not looking at the achievements of men who found gold or relics. You're looking at the innovations of people who discovered something far more valuable. They discovered knowledge. Consider their banking system. In an age when moving money meant physically transporting coins, the Templars created something unprecedented. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar house in Paris and withdraw the equivalent in Jerusalem, using nothing more than an encrypted receipt. This required not just trust and organization, but sophisticated understanding of mathematics, cryptography, and communication networks. Their architectural achievements were equally revolutionary. Templar churches featured geometric proportions that wouldn't be fully understood until the Renaissance. They incorporated acoustic properties that created specific resonant frequencies. Their buildings weren't just functional, they were designed to produce particular states of consciousness in those who entered them. But perhaps most intriguing of all were their reported experiments with what medieval sources describe as divine mathematics. Templars were known to spend hours in meditation, not on scripture, but on geometric patterns. They studied the relationship between number, sound, and light. They explored what they called the architecture of creation itself. Does this sound familiar? It should. Because these medieval knights were investigating the same fundamental questions that occupy quantum physicists today. The relationship between consciousness and reality, the mathematical underpinnings of existence, the possibility that information, not matter, might be the true foundation of everything we see. Here's where the story takes a turn that most historians refuse to follow. What if the Templars didn't just stumble upon ancient artifacts in those tunnels? What if they discovered something that fundamentally changed their understanding of reality itself? Recent archaeological evidence suggests the chambers beneath the Temple Mount were far more sophisticated than previously imagined. Not just storage rooms or ritual spaces, but something resembling laboratories, carved channels that could have conducted water or other fluids, stone chambers with acoustic properties that modern science is only beginning to understand, and most mysteriously, geometric patterns etched into the bedrock itself. These patterns aren't random decorations, they're mathematical formulae rendered in stone, equations that describe harmonic ratios, geometric progressions, and proportional relationships that govern everything from the structure of atoms to the spiral of galaxies. The Templars spent 9 years studying these patterns. 9 years learning to read what amounted to a textbook of cosmic law written in the language of sacred geometry. And when they finally understood what they were looking at, they realized they had discovered the operating instructions for reality itself. This knowledge transformed them, but it also isolated them, because the Templars had glimpsed a universe far more complex, far more interconnected, and far more dependent on consciousness than the medieval worldview could accommodate. They tried to encode their discoveries into their architecture, their symbols, their rituals. They attempted to create a new form of Christianity that incorporated these cosmic insights. They began to see themselves not as servants of earthly powers, but as custodians of universal truth. And that's when they became dangerous, not to pilgrims or merchants or even Muslims. They became dangerous to a power structure that depended on keeping humanity ignorant of its true potential. Think about what it means to be 700 years ahead of your time. Picture Galileo trying to explain heliocentrism to medieval peasants. Imagine Einstein presenting relativity theory to Victorian scientists. Now consider the Knights Templar attempting to share cosmic consciousness with 13th century Europe. The knowledge they uncovered beneath Jerusalem wasn't just advanced, it was revolutionary in ways that threatened every assumption about the nature of existence. They had discovered what we might now call the quantum foundation of reality. The understanding that consciousness and matter are fundamentally entangled. That information, not substance, forms the bedrock of everything we perceive. But here's the tragedy. They were operating in a world that wouldn't develop the conceptual framework to understand these insights for another 7 centuries. They were speaking a language that wouldn't be invented until the age of quantum mechanics, particle physics, and consciousness research. So they did what visionaries have always done when faced with an unready world. They went underground. They encoded their knowledge into symbols, rituals, and architectural achievements that would preserve the truth until humanity was ready to rediscover it. The Gothic cathedrals they inspired weren't just religious buildings. They were 3-dimensional equations rendered in stone, each arch calculated to create specific resonant frequencies, every proportion designed to induce particular states of awareness in those who entered. The rose windows weren't decorative. They were mandala-like focal points for consciousness expansion. Take Chartres Cathedral, built under heavy Templar influence. Modern acoustic analysis reveals that the building functions as a massive resonating chamber. When filled with human voices, it creates standing wave patterns that correspond to what neuroscientists now recognize as brainwave states associated with expanded awareness. The labyrinth embedded in its floor follows mathematical principles that mirror the structure of the human brain. Walking it produces measurable changes in consciousness, shifts that the Templars understood centuries before we developed the instruments to detect them. But their most profound discovery lay in what they learned about the relationship between mind and reality. Deep in those tunnels beneath Jerusalem, surrounded by geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own intelligence, the Templars experienced something that shattered their medieval worldview. They realized that consciousness wasn't produced by the brain, but rather that the brain was a receiver, a biological antenna tuned to frequencies of awareness that pervaded the cosmos. They understood that what we call physical reality was actually information made manifest through the act of observation. Sound familiar? It should. Because the Templars had discovered, through direct experience, what quantum physicists would later prove mathematically. That reality is participatory. That consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining what becomes actual versus what remains merely potential. This wasn't philosophy to them, it was practical knowledge. They learned to work with these principles, developing techniques that allowed them to influence probability, to access information across vast distances, to coordinate their activities through what we might now call quantum entanglement. Their communication network wasn't just efficient, it was paranormal. Messages traveled between Templar houses faster than any physical messenger could carry them. Battle plans were coordinated across continents with a precision that defied the technology of the time. They had tapped into what mystics call the field of pure information, what physicists now recognize as the quantum vacuum, and what the ancient texts describe as the mind of God. They had learned to read the code underlying reality itself. But knowledge like this comes with a price. The more the Templars understood about the true nature of existence, the more they realized how fundamentally their society had misunderstood the human condition. They saw that the political and religious structures of their time were based on illusions, on the assumption that consciousness was separate from matter, that humans were isolated beings competing for scarce resources. They began to envision a different kind of civilization, one based on cooperation rather than competition, one that recognized the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence, one that honored the role of consciousness in shaping reality. And this vision made them the most dangerous organization on Earth. Not because they threatened any particular king or pope, but because they threatened the entire foundation of hierarchical power. If consciousness is primary, if reality is participatory, if all beings are fundamentally connected, then the whole notion of some people having the right to dominate others becomes absurd. The Templars had discovered what every authoritarian system fears most. They had found proof that human beings are far more powerful, far more connected, and far more capable than any ruling class wants them to know. So the charges brought against them in 1307 weren't really about heresy or corruption. They were about suppression. The systematic elimination of knowledge that could have transformed human civilization 700 years ago. But here's what makes this story more than just historical tragedy. The knowledge the Templars discovered didn't die with them. They were too smart, too far-seeing to let that happen. Before their destruction, they managed to embed their insights into a network of symbols, structures, and secret societies that would preserve the truth across centuries of darkness. The Gothic architecture they inspired continued to encode their discoveries. The mathematical principles they uncovered influenced everything from cathedral design to the layout of medieval cities. The symbols they created found their way into heraldry, art, and eventually into the iconography of the scientific revolution. Most importantly, they established lineages of knowledge that would survive underground, passing from master to student across generations, waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to openly embrace these cosmic truths. That moment, I believe, is now. We live in an age when quantum physics has validated the Templars' core insights about the nature of reality, when neuroscience has confirmed their understanding of consciousness, when network theory has proven their intuitions about interconnectedness. We're finally ready to understand what those 9 knights discovered in the darkness beneath Jerusalem. We're finally prepared to build the kind of civilization they envisioned, a world based not on domination and separation, but on cooperation and unity. The question is whether we'll have the courage to act on this knowledge, or whether we'll repeat the pattern of the 14th century and allow fear to triumph over truth once again. The evidence for this underground preservation is everywhere once you know how to look for it. Walk into any major university library and you'll find architectural details that whisper of Templar influence, stone carvings that seem decorative but actually encode mathematical relationships, proportional systems that create spaces designed to enhance learning and contemplation. Consider the founding of the great universities themselves: Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne. All emerged during the centuries following the Templar suppression. All incorporated design principles that seem to have sprung from nowhere. All featured libraries built according to acoustic specifications that modern researchers are only now beginning to understand. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate acts of preservation by people who understood that knowledge, once discovered, finds a way to survive even the most systematic attempts at destruction. The Renaissance offers perhaps the clearest example of this hidden continuity. Suddenly, after centuries of what we call the Dark Ages, European civilization experienced an explosion of innovation that transformed everything from art to astronomy. Where did this knowledge come from? How did humanity suddenly rediscover principles that had been lost for over 1,000 years? The traditional answer focuses on the rediscovery of classical texts, the influence of Islamic scholarship, the patronage of wealthy merchants. All true, but all missing the deeper current that connected these developments. Because if you trace the lineages of Renaissance innovation, if you follow the networks of influence that connected the great minds of that era, you find something remarkable. Almost every major breakthrough can be traced back to individuals who had connections to groups that preserved Templar knowledge. Leonardo da Vinci didn't just happen to stumble upon principles of sacred geometry. His notebooks reveal systematic study of proportional relationships that mirror exactly what the Templars encoded into their architecture. His understanding of the relationship between sound, light, and form reflects insights that medieval knights had discovered in the tunnels beneath Jerusalem. Galileo's innovations in optics weren't just brilliant intuition. They built upon lens-grinding techniques that had been preserved in secret for centuries by craftsmen who understood the mathematical principles governing the behavior of light. The same principles the Templars had explored in their quest to understand the fundamental nature of reality. Even the printing press, that great democratizer of knowledge, emerged from techniques of mechanical reproduction that had been developed by monastic communities with deep connections to Templar traditions. The ability to preserve and disseminate information wasn't just a technological achievement. It was the fulfillment of a centuries-old commitment to ensuring that truth would eventually triumph over suppression. But the preservation of Templar knowledge wasn't limited to Europe. When the order was suppressed in 1307, many knights fled to regions beyond papal authority: Portugal, Scotland, the Eastern Mediterranean. In each location, they established new networks that would carry their insights forward through different cultural channels. In Portugal, they reconstituted themselves as the Order of Christ, maintaining their naval expertise and their understanding of navigation techniques that wouldn't be officially discovered for another century. When Portuguese explorers began their great voyages of discovery, they carried with them not just courage and ambition, but knowledge of ocean currents, wind patterns, and celestial navigation that had been secretly preserved since the Crusades. The precision of these expeditions wasn't just luck or superior seamanship. Portuguese navigators possessed charts and techniques that reflected understanding of global geography far more complete than their contemporaries realized. They knew where they were going because they carried knowledge that had been gathered centuries earlier by an organization that had never really disappeared, only transformed. In Scotland, Templar refugees found protection among clans that had their own reasons to resist papal authority. Here, the knowledge took on different forms, influencing the development of what would become Freemasonry. The geometric principles, the emphasis on sacred architecture, the ritual preservation of ancient wisdom, all carried forward Templar insights in forms adapted to new circumstances. But perhaps most significantly, the Scottish preservation of Templar knowledge influenced the philosophical foundations that would eventually shape the American experiment in democracy. The concept of natural law, the understanding of human interconnectedness, the vision of a society based on cooperation rather than domination, these weren't just Enlightenment innovations. They were the political expression of cosmic principles that the Templars had discovered 7 centuries earlier. When you read the founding documents of the United States, when you examine the architectural symbolism built into Washington, D.C., when you trace the intellectual networks that connected the American founders, you find echoes of insights that originated in those tunnels beneath Jerusalem. The vision of human potential that inspired the Declaration of Independence reflects understanding of consciousness and reality that medieval knights had died protecting. This isn't to suggest some grand conspiracy spanning centuries. It's something far more profound. It's evidence of how truth, once discovered, refuses to remain buried. How insights into the fundamental nature of existence will always find ways to influence human development, even when powerful institutions try to suppress them. The Templars understood that their knowledge was too important to be lost. So they didn't just hide it, they wove it into the very fabric of human civilization. Every cathedral that lifts human consciousness, every university that expands human understanding, every democratic institution that recognizes human dignity, all carry forward, in their own way, the cosmic insights that 9 knights discovered in the darkness beneath the Temple Mount. And this brings us to perhaps the most important realization of all. The Templars weren't wrong about what they discovered. They were simply early, 700 years too early for a world that wasn't ready to understand what they had learned about the nature of consciousness, the structure of reality, and the true potential of human existence. But we live in different times now. We have quantum physics to explain the mathematical foundations they discovered. We have neuroscience to validate their understanding of consciousness. We have network theory to confirm their insights about interconnectedness. We have global communication systems that prove the feasibility of their vision of unified human cooperation. Most importantly, we live in an era when the old paradigms of domination and separation are clearly failing. Environmental crisis, social inequality, political polarization, all these challenges stem from the same fundamental error that the Templars recognized 7 centuries ago. The illusion that consciousness is separate from matter, that humans are isolated beings, that competition rather than cooperation is the fundamental law of existence. The knowledge they died protecting isn't just historically interesting. It's practically necessary for our survival as a species. We need their understanding of interconnectedness to solve environmental problems. We need their insights about consciousness to heal social divisions. We need their vision of cooperative civilization to navigate the challenges of a globally connected world. The question isn't whether the Templars were right about what they discovered. Modern science has validated their core insights in ways they could never have imagined. The question is whether we'll have the wisdom to apply this knowledge while we still have time. Because here's what the Templars understood that we're only now beginning to grasp. Consciousness isn't just something that happens inside individual brains. It's a field that connects all existence. When enough people understand this truth, when enough humans align with these cosmic principles, reality itself begins to shift. We're approaching what systems theorists call a phase transition, a moment when accumulated knowledge and awareness reach a critical threshold and suddenly transform the entire system. It happened during the Renaissance when preserved Templar insights finally found expression in a world ready to receive them. It's happening again now, but on a global scale. The underground networks that preserve Templar knowledge across 7 centuries of suppression are finally ready to emerge into the light. The cosmic principles they discovered are being validated by our most advanced sciences. The civilization they envisioned is becoming not just possible but necessary. But transformation on this scale requires more than just understanding. It requires courage. The same kind of courage those 9 knights showed when they descended into the unknown beneath Jerusalem. The same courage their successors showed when they preserved dangerous knowledge through centuries of persecution. We're being called to that same courage now. Not to dig through ancient tunnels, but to dig through the assumptions and beliefs that keep us trapped in obsolete ways of thinking. Not to preserve knowledge in secret, but to apply it openly in ways that transform how we live, work, and relate to each other. The Templars planted seeds of transformation that have been growing in darkness for 700 years. Those seeds are finally ready to sprout. The question is whether we'll tend the garden or let the weeds of fear and ignorance choke out the new growth. Picture yourself standing at the edge of tomorrow, looking back at yesterday's martyrs. The Templars weren't executed for their crimes. They were eliminated for their timing. They had discovered principles that wouldn't be accepted until our modern era developed the language to understand them. Consider what we now know about quantum entanglement. Particles separated by vast distances somehow maintain instantaneous connection. When one changes, the other responds immediately, regardless of space or time. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. The Templars called it divine communication. Their network operated on principles that modern physicists have only recently proven possible. Messages traveled between distant strongholds faster than any horse could carry them. Battle strategies were coordinated across continents with precision that defied medieval technology. They weren't using magic. They were applying laws of consciousness that science is only now beginning to recognize. But here's what makes their story truly revolutionary. They didn't just discover these principles accidentally. They developed systematic methods for working with them. In those chambers beneath Jerusalem, they created what we might now recognize as consciousness laboratories, spaces designed to amplify human awareness and facilitate direct experience of quantum realities. The geometric patterns they carved into bedrock weren't decorations. They were instructions. mathematical formulae that describe how consciousness interfaces with the quantum field. When medieval chroniclers described Templar knights spending hours in contemplation of sacred shapes, they were witnessing early experiments in applied consciousness research. So here we stand at the threshold of understanding, 7 centuries after those first knights descended into darkness beneath Jerusalem. The knowledge they died protecting has finally found its moment. Quantum physics validates their insights about consciousness. Network theory confirms their understanding of interconnectedness. The civilization they envisioned is no longer impossible. It's inevitable. The only question remaining is whether we'll embrace their legacy with the same courage they showed in preserving it. Because the Templars weren't wrong about the future they glimpsed. They were simply waiting for us to catch up.